My son had the following experience at the age of 4 years in our Worcestershire home. He was an only child and spent much of his time in the company of a cat who shared his tastes and pursuits, even to the extent of fishing in the river weir with him, the cat being far more proficient at the sport than the boy. When the cat died, we none of us dared to break the news to the child, and were much surprised when he asked us to say why his cat only came to play with him at nights nowadays. When we questioned him about it, he stoutly maintained that his cat was there in bodily form every night after he went to bed, looking much the same but a little thinner. At about the same age, one evening after being in bed 1 hour, I heard him cry out, and going upstairs, his maid also heard and ran up, and asking him what was the matter, he said that an old gentleman with a long grey beard like his grandfather came into his room, and stood at the front of his bed. At the very moment, the former had a seizure in his carriage while driving through the streets of Birmingham, from which he died without regaining consciousness. Later on he recognized a photograph of his grandfather as being the person he saw at the foot of his bed. My wife, the maid, and myself can vouch for the accuracy of these statements, also friends to whom we have related these facts.
When I was a little girl living with my family near Michelstadt in the Odenwald, I remember an old woman like an old witch, whose name was Louise, and who was called Fife Louise, because she exhibited pipes for sale in her cottage window, along with the cheap dress stuffs, needles and threads, and simple toys for children which were her stock in trade. She had a favorite cat which was devoted to her, but its attachment doesn't seem to have been enough to make her happy, for she married a young sergeant named Laudenschlager, who might have been her son, or indeed her grandson, and who, as everyone said, courted her for her money. She died as long ago as 1869, and during her last illness the devoted cat was always with her. It kept watch beside the body when she was dead, and refused to be driven away. In a fit of exasperation Laudenschlager seized it, carried it off, and drowned it in the little river Mumling, at a place where the road from Michelstadt to the neighboring village Steinbach runs near the water's edge. It was bordered with poplars then, but chestnut trees shade it now. Soon after his first wife was buried, Laudenschlager married again, and opened an eating house in Steinbach, where he established his second wife. He had a sister whom he placed in the cottage of poor Fife Louise. She carried on the business, and every day Laudenschlager used to walk over from Steinbach to see how she was getting on, returning in the evening to his wife, who used to relate to my mother that he frequently came home terrified and bathed in perspiration, for as he passed the place where he had drowned the cat, its ghost used to come out of the river and run beside him along the dark road, sometimes terrifying him still more by jumping in front of him. After a few years of married life the second wife died, and Laudenschlager married a third. The little cottage business had prospered, and in its place he now had a considerable draper's shop in Michelstadt. He continued to walk over from Steinbach, where now the third wife lived in the eating house, and the ghost of the cat continued to frighten him by appearing at nightfall as he walked beside the river. I can remember hearing his third wife describe his dread of it, and my mother has told me how both the sister and the second wife used to say the same thing, though I was too young then for them to tell me about it. Laudenschlager used also to complain to the country people who came to dine at his eating house. He considered himself an ill-used man, and felt that the supernatural powers were treating him very hardly, and subjecting him to a real persecution. I have only the conversation of his wife and the gossip of the village to vouch for his sincerity, and the genuineness of the apparition is supported only by Laudenschlager's word, but his evident anger and agitation were accepted as genuine, and no one dreamed of doubting his word. He was not at all a dreamy or imaginative man, and did not drink. His passion was merely momentary. He was not only a draper and caterer but a usurer, and realized something of a fortune by lending money on good security to peasants and farmers who, it was said, did not consider how they bound themselves when they signed the papers he put before them. Laudenschlager continued to be haunted by the cat ghost at irregular intervals for more than 20 years, and it made a marked change in his character. He became serious, and during the latter part of his life would only talk about religion and read sacred literature. He died about 10 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago I visited a medium, Mrs. Davis of 44 Laburnum Grove, Portsmouth. I had been seated only a few minutes when a little pug dog of hers looked up in the direction of my knees and down towards my feet, growling and howling in a most strange manner. "What on earth is he looking at?" I exclaimed. "Oh," said the medium, "there is a little fox-terrier lying across your feet. One half of his face is quite dark and the other half white, but he has such a peculiar black patch over the eye that one would almost think it was a black bruise. Now, sir, I had such a little dog in India, but this lady did not know of him, and would never have known had he not, as I afterwards found, died out there. This is not only a case of the appearance of an animal after death, but also a case in which it was seen by another animal, as also by the medium. I am also told that the pug dog who had this vision of my dog was once seen to pounce upon what seemed to the medium to be several cats, near the copper in the scullery of the same house. The medium asked a neighbor if the previous occupants had had any cats. "Oh, yes," replied the neighbor, "and badly the poor things were served, for they were cruelly thrown into the copper, which was full of boiling water."
One evening in February, 1906, my son and I were quietly reading, in full gaslight, our small gray cat lying on the sofa a short distance from where I sat. Suddenly I saw on my knee a large red and white cat which belonged to us in India, which was a very dear family friend, and as fond of us as a child. On leaving India we were obliged to give him to a friend, and in the end he shared the usual fate of pets in that country, making a meal for some wild animal. Roofy Oofy, in his spirit shape, purred vigorously, rubbing his head against me and giving every sign of delight at seeing us again. I did not speak, but in a few minutes my son looked up and said, "Mother, Roofy Oofy is on your knee," when the spirit cat jumped down and went to him to be petted. Then he returned to me, and walked along the sofa to where our present cat, Kim, was asleep. The spirit cat, with a look of almost human fun, patted Kim's head, the latter awaking with a start. Roofy Oofy continued to make playful dabs at Kim's ears, Kim following each movement with glaring eyes, distinctly seeing and realizing that another cat was invading his sofa, but not in the least angry with him and quite ready to play. After a few minutes the spirit cat came back to my knee, whereupon the earth cat displayed jealousy which Roofy Oofy resented, but before they came to actual words the spirit cat retired behind the veil. After the doctor's story, "I fear mine will appear too trifling," said Mrs. M, "but as it is the only circumstance of the kind that ever happened to myself, I prefer giving it you to any of the many stories I have heard. About 15 years ago I was staying with some friends at a magnificent old seat in Yorkshire, and our host, being very much crippled with the gout, was in the habit of driving about the park and neighborhood in a low pony phaeton, on which occasions I often accompanied him. One of our favorite excursions was to the ruins of an old abbey just beyond the park, and we generally returned by a remarkably pretty rural lane leading to the village, or rather small town, of C. One fine summer's evening we had just entered this lane when, seeing the hedges full of wild flowers, I asked my friend to let me alight and gather some. I walked before the carriage picking honeysuckles and roses as I went along, till I came to a gate that led into a field. It was a common country gate with a post on each side, and on one of these posts sat a large white cat, the finest animal of the kind I had ever seen, and as I have a weakness for cats I stopped to admire this sleek, fat puss, looking so wonderfully comfortable in a very uncomfortable position, the top of the post, on which it was sitting with its feet doubled up under it, being out of all proportion to its body, for no Angola ever rivaled it in size. "Come on gently," I called to my friend, "here's such a magnificent cat." For I feared the approach of the phaeton would startle it away before he had seen it. "Where?" said he, pulling up his horse opposite the gate. "There," said I, pointing to the post. "Isn't he a beauty? I wonder if it would let me stroke it?" "I see no cat," said he. "There on the post," said I, but he declared he saw nothing, though puss sat there in perfect composure during this colloquy. "Don't you see the cat, James?" said I in great perplexity to the groom. "Yes, ma'am, a large white cat on that post." I thought my friend must be joking, or losing his eyesight, and I approached the cat, intending to take it in my arms and carry it to the carriage, but as I drew near she jumped off the post, which was natural enough, but to my surprise she jumped into nothing. As she jumped she disappeared. No cat in the field, none in the lane, none in the ditch. "Where did she go, James?" "I don't know, ma'am. I can't see her," said the groom, standing up in his seat and looking all round. I was quite bewildered, but still I had no glimmering of the truth, and when I got into the carriage again my friend said he thought I and James were dreaming, and I retorted that I thought he must be going blind. I had a commission to execute as we passed through the town, and I alighted for that purpose at the little haberdasher's, and while they were serving me I mentioned that I had seen a remarkably beautiful cat sitting on a gate in the lane, and asked if they could tell me who it belonged to, adding it was the largest cat I ever saw. The owners of the shop, and two women who were making purchases, suspended their proceedings, looked at each other and then looked at me, evidently very much surprised. "Was it a white cat, ma'am?" said the mistress. Yes, a white cat, a beautiful creature and. Bless me. Cried 2 or 3, the lady's seen the white cat of sea. It hasn't been seen these 20 years. Master wishes to know if you'll soon be done, ma'am. The pony is getting restless, said James. Of course I hurried out, and got into the carriage, telling my friend that the cat was well known to the people at sea, and that it was 20 years old. In those days, I believe, I never thought of ghosts, and least of all should have thought of the ghost of a cat, but 2 evenings afterwards, as we were driving down the lane, I again saw the cat in the same position. Again my companion could not see it, though the groom did. I alighted immediately, and went up to it. As I approached it turned its head and looked full towards me with its soft mild eyes, and a friendly expression, like that of a loving dog, and then, without moving from the post, it began to fade gradually away, as if it were a vapor, till it had quite disappeared. All this the groom saw as well as myself, and now there could be no mistake as to what it was. A third time I saw it in broad daylight, and my curiosity greatly awakened. I resolved to make further inquiries amongst the inhabitants of sea, but before I had an opportunity of doing so, I was summoned away by the death of my eldest child, and I have never been in that part of the world since. However, I once mentioned the circumstance to a lady who was acquainted with that neighborhood, and she said she had heard of the white cat of sea, but had never seen it. Thanks for listening. If you want more scary story, please like, comment, and subscribe.